Welcome all. I'm joined today by journalist, columnist, author, and professor of international relations at Switzerland's Webster University, Geneva, Dr. Vicken Cheterian. We'll be discussing Armenia's post-war challenges, prospects for peace, and lessons learned. So, Dr. Cheterian, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for the invitation.
Dr. Cheterian, many Armenians desire peace, but the Second Karabakh War in 2020 really impacted the national consciousness. One might say it even traumatized the national consciousness. This was really the latest dark chapter in Armenian history. However, the Armenian, Azerbaijani, and Russian governments have spoken about a final peace, a final settlement. But this is probably the most difficult time in the last 30 years to establish such a peace. So, is it really possible to work towards a peace like that in this context?
I wouldn't say that Armenian public opinion nor Armenian leadership desired peace, neither in the pre-war period, I mean between 1994 and 2020, nor now. I would say that the dominant impression, the feeling, the emotions that dominated was that there was a conflict. In 1994, Armenia won this conflict, and roughly both the political elite as well as the public opinion were satisfied by the results emerging from the conflict. Now, the problem was that Armenia's neighbor to the east, Azerbaijan, was not satisfied with the results, and they openly said and they openly pushed for changes. And the big problem in Armenia was that this Azerbaijani position was not taken into consideration. Now, with 2020 war, things have changed, but they are not symmetrical to what existed before the war. I would say now, after the Second Karabakh War, Armenian elite is confused. They don't have very clear position. They don't say what they want and how to achieve it, while Armenian public opinion is very dissatisfied. On the other hand, when we look what is happening in Azerbaijan, we have the ruling elite there. While they achieved huge success in 2020, they are still not satisfied. They want more. So I don't see any desire for peace, neither in Armenia today, nor in Azerbaijan. So the situation is very complex and much more complicated than what we had between 1994 and 2020.
And we often hear the term preparing populations for peace, but some would say you don't really hear that much from the Azerbaijani and Armenian governments, but you do hear that from other actors. I'm interested what you think when you hear that term, preparing populations for peace.
I find it very problematic because this expression presupposes that the problem is with the public opinions. The problem is with the populations. But I think the central problem is with the ruling elites. They did not seriously engage in trying to solve what was inherited from the period of the Soviet collapse, the 91-94 war. The ruling elites in Yerevan and in Baku, they didn't really engage in solving this. Now, I wouldn't say that the public opinions are ready for peace. Very far from that. We noticed that there is an absence of peace movements in both countries. But simply identifying the population as a problem is very problematic.
And some feel that if there were to be a peace, it would be a peace on Azerbaijan's terms. Do you think that's the case right now? And if so, how can Armenia's interests be juxtaposed to an imposed peace?
I think peace is something totally different from what we are seeing now. To achieve peace, we need both in Armenia and in Azerbaijan kind of a desire to solve these problems based on recognizing that we have a neighbor next to us who's legitimate to exist politically, and not treating the neighbor as subhuman, and recognizing that there are problems and that these problems need political solutions. What we have now after the war is that Armenia is in total confusion, while Azerbaijan is continuing to press to achieve more. And I think the fundamental issue that Azerbaijan has to face is that in Karabakh, in Artsakh, there's an Armenian population which has very specific history, which has very specific political institutions. And to achieve peace, Azerbaijan needs to recognize this and needs to recognize that this Karabakh Armenian reality needs security guarantees. Up to today, Azerbaijan is not giving this. Up to today, Azerbaijan has deployed forces next to villages in Karabakh, and they are posing a threat, a security threat, I would even say an existential threat to Karabakh Armenians. So with this context, I think talking about peace is like talking about utopia, something we desire, but it is very far away from our reality.
And I'm sure you are aware, but there are rumors in the media that another trilateral statement may be in the works between Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Russia. And there has been reports in the media that it will partly focus on the border issue, but also on unblocking regional infrastructure and communications. Let me pose a situation: a day when Azerbaijanis can freely access Armenia and Armenians can freely access Azerbaijan. Can you even imagine such a prospect?
Yes, of course. I think we should not over-dramatize Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict. It's a major problem for both nations, but it's not something unseen in human experience. We can take many examples where, after decades of conflict, two conflict sides reached agreement and started seeing the conflict period as something abnormal, exceptional, and that peace is the normal condition for neighbors. But to achieve that, we still have a long way to go between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And unfortunately, the 2020 war did not help. The long years of stability that Armenia and Azerbaijan had was not used to achieve peace. And now, 1 year after the war, we still need to see serious engagement by both parties to achieve that. But in theory, I don't see a problem in that.
And do you think it would be possible to have a peace while still calling for militarization, closed borders, and no diplomatic relations?
I think the continuous militarization is a major problem. This shows that both Armenia and Azerbaijan, they have security concerns. But what I want to say is that the 2020 war has added layer after layer of complexity to the South Caucasus and specifically to the Karabakh conflict and Armenia-Azerbaijan relations. So now to achieve peace is much more complicated because the war invited new actors to the South Caucasus. Before 2020, the Karabakh conflict was seen largely as part of the context of post-Soviet conflicts. Last year's events brought new actors actively in the South Caucasus. Turkey, we saw it very clearly, Israel, and very recently we saw Iran. So the security dimension has become much more complex. And maybe down the road, in some time, Yerevan and Baku will realize that the only way out is direct negotiations and finding a solution between Armenia and Azerbaijan by excluding outside third, fourth, fifth, and sixth actors.
And do you think there is a contradiction between the desire for peace amongst the Armenian and Azerbaijani governments and the Armenian and Azerbaijani populations?
To be frank, I don't see very serious effort to achieve peace, neither within government circles in Armenia and Azerbaijan, nor within public opinions. After the war, we didn't see any major movement emerging calling for peace. And between 1994 and 2020, those who were active in peace movements, they were individuals or they were NGO activists. So we didn't see any social movement emerging, neither in Armenia nor Azerbaijan, calling for peace. So for the moment, I don't see a huge public demand for that, nor do I see that governments are really trying to achieve peace.
And you earlier mentioned the elite in both Armenia and Azerbaijan and the approach they took towards peace. Do you think that was more of a deciding factor in resulting in the situation we are in today, rather than public opinion and the opinions of the general populace?
I think for the public opinion, Karabakh is a very complex issue. In Armenia, we had it's a complex issue because both Armenian national movement in the late 80s and Azerbaijani national movement in the same period emerged and was crystallized around the Karabakh issue. Armenians wanted to have Karabakh with Armenia, while for Azerbaijan this was seen as dismantling their national territory. So Karabakh as a symbol is very fundamental for both the emergence of Armenian independence, but as well the emergence of Azerbaijani independence. Now this makes Karabakh very symbolic for both nations. And the problem is when you have an issue which is at the center of your national identity, at the center of your independence heritage, it is extremely complex to detach it and make it a very basic political issue where you say these are the different problems we have on Karabakh: security issues, armament, refugees and IDPs, trust building, and so on which you can act. So basic political problems were mixed with identity issue in the last 25 years. As a result, it was extremely difficult to find some solution on the Karabakh negotiation table.
I mean, that's really interesting, the theme of identity. In a sense, it must be quite difficult to change people's perception of their identity compared to their general opinions. Do you think that perhaps things are moving too fast for these changes to occur? More time is needed?
Time by itself will not solve it. Armenian strategy between 1994 and 2020 largely was based on thinking that if we keep the status quo, if time passes, this problem will be solved. Azerbaijanis will accept the reality, they will forget about it, and so on. So I think time by itself is not the solution. So that basically we need to use time to take concrete steps towards conflict resolution. And one thing to do is to recognize the reality of the conflict, to recognize the different political problems that Armenia and Azerbaijan have, and the necessity to discuss about these things and to find concrete, realistic solutions around them. This was not done in the 26-year period. And for the moment, I don't see this being done, especially from the side of Azerbaijan. When you look what Azerbaijani authorities are saying, they are saying that Karabakh, for the moment, is under Russian military control, but down the road we will take it back. And on top of this, Azerbaijan has ambitions and claims on Armenia itself. So all this is not very helpful to achieve mutual understanding and creating the necessary atmosphere to solve those very complex questions through negotiations.
And you mentioned mutual understanding, and that Armenia for a long time thought that Azerbaijan, if the status quo remained so, that Azerbaijan would give up on its desire. But we saw even during the July clashes in 2020 that there were described pro-war demonstrations in Azerbaijan. Do you think the Armenian side underestimated public opinion in Azerbaijan, underestimated the will of Azerbaijan to continue with the conflict?
It's more dramatic than that. I think in the last 20 years or so, Armenian politicians, but also Armenian experts did not consider Azerbaijani public opinion as something valid, as something necessary to study, and as a feature necessary to engage. They very in a caricatural way said that Azerbaijan is a dictatorship and public opinion does not exist. And you rightly underlined, we saw that there was an Azerbaijani public opinion. Even if Azerbaijan is a dictatorship, no dictator can disregard public moods. Eventually, one of the big problems was that after the summer clashes of last year, there was a public demand for war, for revenge, and simply Ilham Aliyev could not disregard this. He was completely cornered as a result of the events of July 2020. And up to today, I don't see any serious experts in Armenia studying what different segments of the Azerbaijani population think, what their public mood is, and its evolution. More than that, we don't have experts in Armenia who study our Azerbaijani history. They know how Azerbaijani national identity is constructed, and different expressions coming from Yerevan, what kind of impact it has within Azerbaijan. So there's a huge field there which has been left vacant.
And that's interesting that you would say even after the 2020 war, that lesson hasn't been learned.
Yes, absolutely. Even after the war, I don't see within Armenia big effort to cover the problems, the structural deficiencies that Armenia had, which led to kind of believing in certain ideas which were not valid anymore, certain ideas that were inherited from the 1990s. But 20 years later, Armenia had changed, Azerbaijan had changed, and the world had changed. And simply people didn't notice all these changes. So even after the war, I don't see any serious intellectual engagement to revise this.
And finally, you mentioned experts. Why is there a gap between the analysis that comes out of you or Russia or other individuals and the analysis we get in country from within Armenia?
I think this is a very complex question, and it has different layers. One answer is that experts in Armenia, most of them, they mix their identity issues, their emotions with their analysis. When it comes to questions like Karabakh, when it comes to questions like Armenian national interests and its place, on the international relations scene, and especially when it comes to Azerbaijan. So when you mix your identity, your emotions, your desires with analysis, then you get identity but not analysis. But there are other questions as well. One is that Armenian education in the last 20-25 years has declined, did not develop. And we have today a whole generation. You can go out and ask in Yerevan, young students, university students, about the chronology of the history of the Karabakh conflict. And I would guess that very small percentage will know the major events and the dates and the chronology of the development. So when you have this kind of lack of knowledge, you will have difficulties in producing, scientific, adequate studies. And the third is that today, to understand major political developments, international relations, and what is happening, you need complex institutions, and Armenia does not have complex institutions. What we have is one man or one woman shows where a political scientist or a journalist or a public intellectual alone tries to analyze the world. And this cannot be done. In the, where I live, in Geneva or in bigger countries, Germany, United Kingdom, United States, and so on, you have complex institutions functioning. And without complex institutions, you cannot understand what is happening. Just for an example, last year's event was largely because Armenia and Armenian experts missed what is happening between Russia and Turkey. If you have a single individual, for example, let's say a military expert, this expert will see Russia-Turkey relations in a very one-dimensional way. But if you add in the team an economist, an international trade expert, a sociologist, then you will see that Russia-Turkey relations are very complex. And then you will produce an analysis which is much more complex and complicated, and probably you will approach more to what is happening in reality and the paradigmatic shifts taking place in the entire region and international relations. This said, I would like to underline that in the last few months, two very important studies emerged by Armenians in the diaspora that are very relevant to Armenia and to the war and to the post-war situation. One is the white paper edited by three experts, Talim Papazian, Giray Libarigian, and Robert Aydabirian. This is very important to know about the possibilities for Armenian diplomacy in the future. And there's another study which is very important, and I advise your audience to have a look at it. It was edited by Simon Sarajian, and it was an analysis about the reasons for the failure of Armenia during the 2020 war. So these are very valuable efforts, and I hope that colleagues in Armenia will take this as an example, and they will do their own homework to study what went wrong and what should be done in the future.
Well, Dr. Cheterian, insightful as always. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And thank you for joining us on CivilNet.